Hello everyone, welcome listeners and welcome to IGD's post-coronavirus How Could Sustainability Evolve webinar. This webinar is based on the report we published with the same name back in June. This is your opportunity to ask us questions about the report and our hypotheses, and also for us to go into a bit more detail about the report and our hypotheses. You can submit questions throughout the webinar, as Hannah already mentioned, using the questions box. And we really would appreciate that so we can have a good dialogue at the end of the webinar. Can I first of all have a show of hands? Please use the raise hands button if you have actually already read the report. So I can see now, yeah, that's great. A number of you have. Brilliant. For those of you that haven't read the report, we'll be sharing links to the report at the end of the webinar. So by all means, please do access and download the report for free. So let's introduce ourselves. Hi, I'm Toby Pickard and I'm IGD's Head of Insight for Innovations and Futures. And I specialise in innovations and trends and the impact they could have on retailers, suppliers and shoppers. And my work predominantly focuses on innovations, digital insights, sustainability strategies and large macro trends within the food and grocery sector to create strategic insights for the industry. I am joined here today with my colleague and friend Alan Hayes, and I'll now pass over to Alan to introduce himself.
Good morning, folks. This is Alan. I lead IGD's sustainability programs. For those of you who know us, you may be familiar with the fact that we lead a number of sustainability programs through the charitable arm, especially on food waste reduction, food surplus redistribution, sustainable packaging systems, and supply chain collaboration. I think it's fair to say that I get involved with a lot of fascinating stuff, ranging from thought leadership and future program direction to, doing some of the really good work like creating reports that we've done here for the sustainability hypotheses and getting the opportunity to share that with those of you here this morning, everybody else who has read it, and enabling us to, develop a better common understanding of the challenges and what we can do about them.
Thanks for that, Alan. So let's kick off with sort of really highlighting sort of a bit of the elephant in the room. So the pandemic really has highlighted the importance of a robust and resilient food system that functions in all circumstances and can ensure access to sufficient supply of affordable foods for all citizens. How did you approach the development of these hypotheses?
All right, that's a good question, Toby, to start with. Thank you very much. When we put the pandemic in context, when we do look at all of the core sustainability metrics, it's pretty evident that we need to do much more as an industry, as society, to keep ourselves and the planet healthy as we prepare for the future challenges we know we're facing and will continue to face. Whether those challenges are pandemics, extreme weather, changing climate, or other natural disasters. It would be easy for us to lose sight of it because of the pandemic. However, the sustainability issues faced by the UK food system, they remain as significant as they were before the COVID-19 pandemic, despite the disruption and the challenges that were posed. And there's actually some new tensions to manage, yet the same core issues exist. That's what became abundantly clear to us as we dug into this. We did use a cross-functional team of experts within IGD, from our shopper team, from retail, from the charity, from the supply chain team. And we supported that with some external research, some desk research, and a lot of stakeholder conversations. So quite a comprehensive process, Toby.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. That's really good for the listeners to understand sort of the background, I guess, to the methodology and how we came to our 5 hypotheses. I think also some good scene setting would be sort of, what do we mean by sustainability, or how should we think of sustainability?
Yeah, it is a very useful starting point, Toby. You're spot on there. Thank you for that. If we step back and just think about sustainability from a simple human point of view, something that is sustainable is something that will endure. Now, therefore, if we were using our natural resources sustainably and using everything that we have around us, then we would be doing so in ways that would be sustainable. If the use of natural resources would endure. Now, that's not where we are. whether we look at water, whether we look at soil, whether we look at mineral resources, whatever it is that we choose to look at, there are lots of indicators which say that we are not using natural resources in a sustainable way if we think of sustainability as about something that will endure for a long time. So as we state in our report, to achieve a sustainable future or an enduring use of natural resources, whichever way you choose to look at it, that requires us to balance the three well-known pillars of sustainability. So we do need to balance out environmental, social, and economic aspects of sustainability. To dive into just one of these, isn't going to create that sustainable future that we really all want and need.
Thanks, Alan. That's really, really useful context and great for the listeners to get an understanding of those three key pillars of sustainability, as you mentioned, around environment, social, and economic sustainability. So let's dive into the detail at a high level, first of all. So what are the big 5 hypotheses? Can you take us through the big reveal?
Okay, thanks, Toby. Well, for those of you who have read the report, hopefully this won't be new news, but we created this summary to enable lots of time-pressured people to have a quick look at, right, what's the hypothesis about, without they necessarily having to read through all the detail of the report itself. And from the top, the 5 hypotheses are: number 1 is climate change. It has to remain a top priority. First and foremost, it's recognized as the most likely source of major future disruption to our food system. Now, that hasn't changed as such during the pandemic. What's changed is people's realization of the fact that it's going to be the most likely source of major future disruption. So it has to sit there as number 1. Number 2 for us is the fact that resilience planning needs to be much higher up the agenda of businesses along supply chains and across industry, because the vulnerabilities of highly efficient, just-in-time supply chains, those vulnerabilities have been highlighted by the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic crisis. The third hypothesis is that food waste reduction will remain important as a source of efficiency improvements and financial savings. So food waste reduction is going to be driven by the financial aspect, so an economic sustainability issue, not necessarily an environmental one. There is a significant social aspect to it, because for some businesses, food redistribution has actually become more important. We have seen, and it's highlighted in the National Food Strategy Part 1, some of the data about the most vulnerable in our society are the people who have suffered most in terms of quality of diet and lack of access to food during the pandemic. So food redistribution is becoming a much bigger deal as well. The fourth hypothesis, Toby, is focuses in on packaging reduction. Many businesses over the probably preceding 12 months before the pandemic had made significant commitments to packaging reduction. Members of the UK Plastics Pact, businesses making commitments in their own right, businesses moving faster than the Plastics Pact, as we know. Those businesses will seek to honour their commitments, and we've already seen some evidence of businesses stepping up. Now, some businesses might need to just slow down a little bit, but they cannot step back from those commitments, albeit there are some additional tensions to manage around packaging. And the final hypothesis is that food businesses will continue working on sustainability strategies, no doubt about it. If climate change is number 1 and businesses are serious about that and the other 3 hypotheses, then they will continue working sustainability. But don't expect much of that to be readily visible to shoppers in a time of recession and economic crisis and worries about personal health. Many shoppers don't necessarily get sustainability. When they do, they expect it to be done for them by the food industry. So one other comment is that we've committed to monitoring these hypotheses since we published the report, and we're already seeing some supporting evidence for several of these hypotheses, but I'll pick that up as we go through. Toby, back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I look forward to that, seeing or hearing some case studies, especially as the world's changing so quickly. I'm sure that'll be really useful for the listeners. But yeah, let's delve into the 5 hypotheses with a bit more detail and understand what sort of the short to long term impacts that you think they will have on the food and grocery sector. So yeah, the big one, let's kick off with climate change. So how does industry prepare for climate change?
Okay, it's a
and I suppose the follow-up question on that one, sorry, Alan, is sort of, can it? It's such a big challenge. Can the food industry really sort this out?
Yeah, it's it's both can, must, and need. I think it's all three, Toby. But let me try and unpick this a little bit. First of all, we certainly have a realization at the most senior levels in UK food and grocery industry that, climate change is the most likely source of major future disruption, whether that is in the form of pandemics or extreme weathers or the kind of migrations we saw, which triggered some of the Arab Spring. Whether, there's a whole host of different drivers that can emerge, and climate change is going to be the most likely source of those. They're going to disrupt supply chains. I've seen some data recently from McKinsey suggesting that over the next 5 years, supply chain can expect disruption that will last, a couple of months, at least once in every 5 years, and that will have significant cost to every business involved. So that kind of reality has certainly been coming through. What we've also seen is increasing calls across the business, the NGO and stakeholder communities here in the UK for the UK government to implement policies that see the economy building back better, and to implement what are called green growth policies. And then you look at the UN's climate change conference coming to the UK November of next year now, COP26. The UK chairing that, it really does need, and there does seem to be political will to showcase the UK as a country that is making significant progress. And finally, existing UK legislation and policy, whether it's the Agriculture Bill, the Environment Bill, the proposed plastic packaging tax, the Resources and Waste Strategy, the Commitment to Net Zero, Climate Change Act, the National Food Strategy itself, these provide a framework that's better than any country in the world has to tackle climate change. So all of the pieces are there: the imperative, the political will, the framework the business need. So there's plenty that business can do, I believe.
Okay, thanks. So I guess that takes us into sort of, what actions do we think we'll see in both the short and the long term, and what sort of flagged within the report?
Yeah. One of the first things that we flag is the extent to which clear targets and policies are emerging here in the UK through the Environment Bill in particular, and to a lesser extent the Agriculture Bill, and across the whole of the EU, in fact. Clear targets and policies to support them that are aimed at a transition to what's called a net zero economy. So a net zero economy where net zero carbon emissions. And those targets and policies are being set to stimulate economic growth, but green economic growth, rather than the historic economic growth, which is one of increased carbon emissions, increased fossil fuel use, and increased degradation of natural resources. Individual companies are acting. Typically, these are the major multinational global businesses. They're acting and continuing to do so as they move towards decarbonizing their supply chains and moving towards more voluntary reporting of those emissions and setting targets that they will be held to account for publicly. So that's kind of, to start to say, the easy part of actions on climate change, Toby. In the longer term, though, it's the disruption of supply chains and the managing of those disruptions. Because, look, imagine if in the next 12 to 18 months we were to see significant disruption to supply chains, something along the scale of what we saw in the pandemic itself. That's going to lead to a lot of very unhappy citizens and shoppers and consumers. So there's an expectation now that food businesses and the industry as a whole, in the language of the man on the street, gets a grip on this and makes sure that it doesn't happen again. That might be a bit far-fetched in one sense, but that's the expectation we're facing, Toby.
Okay, thanks. I recall, sort of just from what you're saying, I recently saw an example, a case study from John Lewis and Partners, where they're looking to move to electric vehicles to reduce their impact on the climate. Do you expect to see more of these sort of company-led initiatives?
Without a doubt, it's a really good example at a small scale, Toby, of decarbonisation, because those electric vehicles are enabling them to do more home deliveries, but they are effectively net zero carbon. The energy being used clearly is coming from renewable energy sources, and there are no emissions in the vehicles themselves. Yes, there's emissions in construction, but that is a separate construction of vehicles. That's a separate exercise. Really good initiative. We need to see far more of that at scale. It's an example of where UK transport infrastructure needs to be as quickly as possible.
Okay, and I mentioned as I introed climate change that this is a pretty big challenge. Can one company really make a difference, or do you expect to see much more sort of cross-industry collaboration and even sort of inter-sector and inter-industry collaboration to try and deal with this huge challenge?
Yeah, given the classic words, the pace and scale of the challenge and pace and scale of the change we need to see on climate change, I would love to see both competition and collaboration. Now, some of our listeners this morning will have seen some of the Greenpeace activity in the UK in their videos last week, and they will have probably read the position statement from Tesco and some of the quotes from Dave Lewis about that. Now, my reading of that highlights both competition and collaboration. Despite what Greenpeace have said in public, Tesco and Greenpeace and many other organizations have been working on soy and deforestation and climate change issues like that for a long time, looking to do the best they can. And in some of what was highlighted in that Tesco statement, there was very clear competitive positioning of, well, we've been doing the following on plant-based foods and on alternative protein sources and a whole host of other things like that. So elements of competition and collaboration hugely important, because competition drives change faster than any amount of collaboration. Collaboration ensures it can be done at scale and to the right standards.
Thanks, that was a really comprehensive answer. I guess sort of with any hypothesis or future focused work, something that I often deal with, you always have to kind of look at what could be the potential headwinds. So, what do you see as sort of the biggest challenge to preparing for climate change? Things that could sort of trip this hypothesis up and the progress up?
Yeah, there are two things, Toby, that are abundantly clear as potentially significant headwinds. First of all, the severity of any economic recession could just bring investment by businesses to a halt, regardless of the policies that we are seeing being discussed and proposed by UK government. So just the impact of the recession on individual businesses and the food industry as a whole. Secondly, beyond the decarbonisation of supply chains, behavioural changes from us as individual citizens and consumers and shoppers that would be required to underpin sustainable lifestyles. They're a long ways away from where we currently are, and trying to communicate and land those behavioural changes is very, very difficult.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so in the interest of time, I think we need to sort of move on to the other hypotheses. But just before we do that, and as I mentioned to listeners at the beginning, we want this to be an interactive webinar, so please do submit your questions. But we're also running a few polls. So I would now like to ask you if your company has started to prepare more for the impacts of climate change since the outbreak. Please select one of the following. We don't have a strategy, or we have a strategy, but it hasn't been updated. Our strategy has been updated, or we're trying to deal with the impacts of COVID. Great, I can see the responses coming in now. You should be seeing the polls now on your screen. So the majority of you have a strategy, but it hasn't been updated, which I suppose I'm not surprised considering everything you have to deal with during COVID and the likes. Let's move on to the next hypotheses. So resilience opportunities. So the second hypothesis, this seems to have become a bit of an all-encompassing buzzword, Alan. Why is resilience part of the sustainability hypotheses?
Yeah, there's two big issues here, Toby. There's no doubt that the highly efficient supply chains that the UK food industry enjoys, their vulnerabilities have been highlighted by the COVID-19 crisis. So resilience planning is top of mind for many procurement and supply chain and technical people within businesses, along supply chains across industry as a whole. The reason this is a sustainability issue is that it can have a huge impact on efficient resource use, especially from an environmental and from an economic perspective. And if you remember my comments earlier about the redistribution of food and the extent to which that had social impacts, resilience planning is a sustainability issue without a doubt. DEFRA did establish this Industry Resilience Forum during the pandemic, and it'll continue to drive that at a government and an industry-wide level, but it can't really do the individual business planning and connect businesses together. So resilience is really important in here because it's essential for businesses and the entire industry, and it needs to be done in a way that is sensitive to, environmental and economic aspects of resource use.
Okay, and can it really be addressed at an individual business level, sort of resilience?
Yeah, this is one of the great conversations I have with individual businesses. They need to talk about resilience. They can't be resilient. Perhaps the best example of this is if we think about a shoal of fish or a migrating flock of birds. No individual fish in that shoal and no individual bird in that migrating flock necessarily has all of the answers and knows how to get from A to B. That flock gets there because they've got a collective resilience to predators, to getting lost, to many of the things that crop up. So resilience at an industry level, even if you say along an entire supply chain, has to be collaborative and collective. Individual businesses need to be open to that. Otherwise, what they end up doing is they end up sort of managing only the risks that they can manage, and they are then, overwhelmed by those risks that they didn't really recognize and which they needed other people's help and support to manage.
Okay, let's go into a little bit more detail and about what we mean with resilience opportunities. So what do we see as sort of the short and long-term implications?
Well, the first thing to recognize, Toby, for everybody listening here, is that there's further complex and unplanned change ahead as businesses individually navigate the post-crisis landscape. We saw that nearly 30% of people, I think, are still managing the COVID crisis. You asked a question about sustainability strategy in the poll. So we've got that going on. We've got EU exit coming up. We've got the likelihood of further COVID spikes, local lockdowns. So lots of complex and unplanned change coming from those factors. There's also a drive going on for supply chains to become shorter, local, and less complex. But that shorter, local, less complex supply chain brings significant sort of challenges with, last mile or last few mile logistics pattern changes, so further change. And when we look into 2021 and part 2 of the National Food Strategy, we expect that to major on resilience. We've heard a lot from Henry Dimbleby informally about resilience of the UK food system. Probably be quite pragmatic and focused on what's feasible within current legislation and policies, but that isn't going to help any individual business or supply chain to sort its own resilience out. So within that landscape of further complex and unplanned change and some further sort of policy focus on this, businesses collaboratively to find ways of addressing resilience and doing a better job on that.
Thanks. I'd now like to get the view of the listeners and sort of find out how's their company looking to build resilience. So I'm going to launch the second poll. So if you multiple choice, how is your company looking to build resilience? Is it shortening its supply chain, as Alan was mentioning? Is it looking to implement more automation and innovation using technology to try and build resilience? Are you looking to collaborate more on sustainability related issues, or doing other things, or none of these? Okay, I will share the results now. Actually, as you see, collaborating on sustainability and implementing more automation. So yeah, thanks for that, guys. Really interesting, something we can maybe discuss a bit more at the end of the presentation. Let's move into reducing food waste, our third hypothesis. And food waste seems to have been on sort of the sustainability or sustainable development sort of radar and agenda for a long time now. So what's happening in this space, Alan? Bring us up to speed.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose the positive picture on food waste reduction, Toby, is that because it's an important source of efficiency improvements and financial savings, it has become much more embedded in business operations over recent years. The issue really that we've seen during the pandemic was the difficulties around the redistribution of food surplus. So waste and food surplus were continuing to be there, but it just simply wasn't getting out into the redistribution system itself. One of the interesting patterns on food waste is that our own shopper research at IGD suggests that Shoppers at home are being more aware of their food waste and more savvy when it comes to using food, maybe even using it close to or past its use by date. So food waste has gone from being kind of a bit, reducing food has gone from being a bit virtuous for shoppers to being, something really important. So they're seeing the benefits as well. So overall, food waste reduction is, a bit of a positive picture, I believe.
Do we think food waste has gone down during the pandemic? Is that what we're saying?
Certainly there's evidence from RAP and from ourselves at IGD that food waste at home appears to have reduced. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, though, which is hard to pin down, which suggests that food waste has increased within the supply chain and within manufacturing in particular, really driven by fluctuating demand patterns where, and so much of food waste is down to a lot of businesses having to, guess and second guess on, what sales forecast and demand is going to be like. And when they're fluctuating more than usual, that inevitably tends to cause more food waste.
Okay, thanks for that. So let's look at sort of the short to longer term impacts.
Okay, cool. Well, in the short term, the first thing we're seeing is that many of the companies who stepped up during the pandemic to support food redistribution and food distribution charities and vulnerable communities, they're going to continue to do so because they've seen tremendous positive benefit from reputational, from an employee engagement, from a local community support point of view. For the last several years, IGD and RAP have worked on developing and rolling out the food waste reduction roadmap and its supporting toolkits, and they're going to become even more useful for businesses as more and more seek to, gain those efficiency improvements and financial savings that come from reducing waste in the first place. In the shopper world, we see, when I talk to my colleagues in the shopper team, they see a lot of shoppers extending the life of the food they buy. So instead of bits of surplus food going in the bin, it's going into soups and stews and it's being frozen. And, people are even getting to using products, past their use by dates. Recent guidance reissued by RAP a few months ago in conjunction with DEFRA have helped in that. In the long term, a couple of things are apparent. Food production systems and demand planning are already going through overhauls to embed better food waste reduction practices. They also need to try and embed the best way of dealing with food surplus. As somebody said to me, when food surplus redistribution is as easy as throwing something in the bin, then we'll make significant progress. And I suppose the final thought on this, Toby, is that over the slightly longer term, the economic difficulties that we're likely to see during the downturn, during the recession as it now officially is, it's likely to increase food inequalities, unfortunately. So it's just good. We're going to really highlight the need and the importance for redistribution to address, food poverty issues, which are a fact of life here in the UK.
Yeah, an unfortunate fact of life. Thanks for that. So in short, we should expect to see food waste staying firmly on the food and grocery industry's agenda for the foreseeable future. Yeah. I'd now like to have another poll, and this time, actually, listeners, this is more of a poll directed to you as an individual. Have you tried to reduce your own household food waste since lockdown in March? Please select one of the three answers, be it I waste less than pre-lockdown, I waste as much, or I waste more. So overriding, we're seeing that people are wasting less, which is a really positive poll. That's great to see. Thanks very much. So can't really talk about food waste and not talk about packaging. The topic of packaging and food waste seem to go hand in hand, and prior to the COVID pandemic, packaging was plastic single-use packaging was well and truly seen in the public eye as public enemy number one. However, packaging obviously plays a really important role in preserving product life and also in hygiene for the products inside. So has industry, the shopper, the consumer changed their mind on packaging, would you say, Alan? And do you think this will continue?
Okay, well, I suppose in terms of background, Toby, I just want to return to what I mentioned earlier, which is that a lot of businesses had already made significant commitments to packaging reduction prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and they will seek to honor those commitments. and the plastic packaging tax consultation, which is still out there, and consultation closes in a few weeks' time, and that tax coming in, I think, in 2022. It's going to accelerate commitments from big businesses about reducing packaging and reducing plastic packaging. What's really happened on the shopper front is that safety and personal hygiene considerations have meant that many shoppers think that more packaging is a good thing because it protects me personally and my safety, and that's kind of more important than the environmental impacts. So what it does is it creates an additional tension to navigate for those businesses who are, serious in making commitments about reducing their packaging. So it's an added tension.
And how do you see this sort of tension manifesting moving forward? What will be the next outcome of this?
Well, it's an interesting discussion. When I was talking to stakeholders across industry, one said that I've spent 2 years reducing packaging on a wide range of goods, and I put it all back on in 30 minutes, which was kind of the response to the COVID pandemic. Now, it's therefore perfectly feasible for that organization to reverse that, what they did in 30 minutes, and go back to the 2 years worth, and doing that in a sensitive way. But all they do is they get back to where they were 6 months ago. But doing that quite quickly is the first thing. Other businesses have said to me, well, nobody's writing to us about putting more packaging in product, but they want to know about the safety of the shopping environment. And she said to me, that's what we have focused on in our shopper communications. Not that we're putting more packaging on our product to keep you safe. They focus on telling shoppers this is a safe shopping environment. So some of it is about technical work for businesses to do. An awful lot of it is about how they shape communication to shoppers. And the net of all of that is I expect to see some businesses delaying the commitments, the deadlines that they've put on some of those public commitments, and will make slower progress on packaging. I think that's the sum of it, Toby.
Okay, thanks very much. And for the sake of consistency with the other hypotheses, can you take the listeners through some of the shorter and longer term thinking on these hypotheses?
Well, the first one is that there is certainly, for a reasonable number of shoppers, there is an understanding that, packaging reduction is less important because my safety, my personal safety, the safety of my family, the health of my family is far more important. So there's probably the flip side of that is far more innovation and innovative ways required by businesses to meet these commitments so that shoppers still feel safe. You and I feel safe with handling packed product and food. And the other factor is that the NGOs have been quiet on packaging for the last 6 months, let's say. It's clearly time for those gloves to come off. We've seen that with the Greenpeace action on deforestation. We expect more of the NGOs to step up their work on packaging and drawing attention to it. A couple of other headlines to pull out are that we've seen an awful lot of range rationalization during the crisis. Some retailers, some categories, so 20-30% less SKUs and fewer packaging formats. That should help if it sticks and if it stays. Looking to the longer term, a couple of things stand out, I think, Toby. Then greater investment in alternatives to single use. That has to be the holy grail, and a particular focus on sort of smaller closed loop systems and an overall increase in the circularity of packaging. So don't think one big single circular economy for packaging, but think lots of closed loops for specific materials in certain areas. That's likely to be a way forward. And then greater reuse of packaging, as we've seen with the recent Tesco launch of the Loop system with a number of major brands, bespoke packaging for reuse. That's our direction of travel in the long term.
Okay, that's really helpful. Yeah, it's a very interesting initiative, the Tesco and Loop initiative around shoppers reusing packaging. So I recall a number of years ago now, when the single-use plastic bag levy came into force, there was a pretty significant drop in usage. Do you think the banning of hard-to-recycle materials will have a similar impact?
Well, this is a difficult one for IGD because we believe so strongly in the power of collaboration. However, I do recognise that there is a prominent sort of line of thinking on this, which says, look, industry will act more consistently and more quickly when faced with a cliff edge, such as a ban. I suppose the role for collaboration in the context of a potential ban is encouraging innovation, because collaboration can too easily end up being a talking shop that defends the status quo. So collaboration that drives innovation is probably the best way to try and mitigate calls for legislation. And on this specific issue, we recognise that there's a potential role for both legislation and greater collaborative innovation.
Okay, thanks. So I'd now like to move on to the fourth poll and ask the listeners, does your company have a circular economy strategy, a yes or no, or you're not actually sure what circular economy is? So results are coming in. It's 40s, late 30s for a no, 40, 45 for yeses, and 20% roughly saying they're not sure what circular economy is. Alan, could you very quickly sort of summarize what circular economy is for those listeners that aren't aware?
Okay, in very simple terms, the way that so much of our current economy, UK-wide, globally, it operates on a linear basis. We take some stuff from the natural environment, we grow it, we mine it, we dig it out of oil and gas fields, we make stuff with it, then we chuck it away. What's left? So it's take, make, waste, and it's a linear system. A circular economy seeks to take materials from the natural world, use them in various different ways, and keep them in use, so that we never get to a point where waste occurs, because waste is, very simply a very poor, inefficient use of finite natural resources. So it's really a contrast to the current linear economy. How to make that work in practice is always the challenge, but there are many ways. But it does, circularity does bring lots of benefits, but it does bring a few challenges in terms of how we approach our historic and current way of doing things.
Okay, thanks very much. So let's move on to our fifth and final hypothesis, that industry is going to remain true to sustainability. I know from my work that I've done in the past, looking at sustainability initiatives from the food and grocery sector, that actually industry has remained true to its commitments. So, for example, during the 2007 and 8 economic downturn, both retailers and manufacturers continued to work on their sustainability initiatives. Is it different this time, I suppose? And will industry remain true to its sustainability commitments, Alan?
Mm-hmm. I think they will both remain true to their sustainability commitments, Toby. They'll continue working their sustainability strategies, and we know that many of the leading retailers and food and grocery manufacturers are looking to enhance and further strengthen their sustainability strategies. They're going to focus on climate change and on resilience primarily, but we also do expect to see these initiatives based on sustainability that look to build trust and loyalty with shoppers, because in the long term, that has been something that's well proven in, you mentioned the 2007-2008 economic downturn and subsequently. And this point is reinforced when we consider that retail has been one of the few points of contact outside the home for many of us during the COVID-19 crisis. Retail staff became a vital part of communities. So businesses who play their part there through donations and support of vulnerable citizens and communities, they've reaped a great benefit from what is really social sustainability in action. This isn't people doing things because it's just nice to do or because the comms team said it was a nice idea or it's a marketing initiative. This is social sustainability at play. And I'm quite optimistic that many leading businesses will continue to build on this. They want deeper relationships on sustainability, on these social issues with their staff and with communities they operate in. So I'm very optimistic about that.
Brilliant. This all sounds very positive, which is nice to hear, even on the day that we find out we're in recession. But is it all good news?
Yeah, the economic downturn, Toby, in the recession, it will be a headwind. It may hinder the capacity of companies to invest in solutions. The positive side of this, though, is that every single one of us has got the capacity to act in their own individual sphere of influence, as an employee, as a citizen, as a member of community. So the economic downturn doesn't have to impact on our individual ability. And it's that, I suppose, side of social capital that I see being the most important foil to the economic downturn and the damage which it might do.
That's really interesting, thanks. So we should remain cautiously optimistic, let's say. So let's take a look at the short and longer term impacts on the industry. And also, I'd just like to remind listeners that, yeah, you will have an opportunity to ask both Alan and myself questions at the end. So if you've got any questions, please do send them through. But for now, Alan, if you could take us through the short and long-term impacts, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll just pull out a couple, Toby, if I may. In the short term, two things would be worth considering. Companies that continue to actively and visibly demonstrate that people, human beings, their employees, their communities, the places where their factories are built, the places where their supply chains are operating from, demonstrating that people are at the heart of their business. They're the ones that are going to thrive and prosper, we believe, post the pandemic itself. So this is one of the really positive aspects of the pandemic impact we see. And building on that, retailers in particular do appear to be revitalizing the social sustainability aspects of their strategies within, because retail has so many stores, so many local communities, and revitalizing those social sustainability aspects of their strategies with a particular focus on the legacy of key workers and the support for vulnerable groups. That continues to be essential in communities. Long term, and this goes back to some of the comments about competition and collaboration earlier on, I'm also quite optimistic that businesses will use sustainability to seek commercial advantage. And this is likely to be via strategic programs of reducing waste and energy and transportation cost. And I see this operating in the UK along supply chains within particular sectors. We have anecdotal evidence of some collaboration that would never have happened and wasn't happening before the pandemic. So we expect to see more of that coming through. And I suppose my final comment is that in the long term, looking back maybe 5-10 years from now, what we are going to see, I believe, is that businesses which have implemented strategies and initiatives that benefit society and not just their shareholders, they will be seen as the businesses who have really cracked the recipe for business success in the future.
Okay, thanks very much. That's really, really interesting. I'd now like to take the opportunity to take ask one final poll of the listeners. It's about sort of your own company. So has your own company continued with its sustainability commitments? You should be seeing the poll on your screen now. A simple yes, no, you've put it on hold, or we don't have any sustainability commitments. Really positive with 95% or 90%, over 90%, let's say, saying they're continuing with their sustainability strategy. So that's really positive and a good reinforcement or endorsement, let's say, Alan, of that hypothesis. This sort of brings the end of our deep dive into the hypotheses and the listeners' opportunity to submit some questions, which I've been receiving throughout the webinar. So the first one, Alan, that I'd like to ask you, sort of what, and this from a business point of view, what characterizes leadership on sustainability within the food and grocery sector?
Yeah, I suppose that I'll call out three elements, Toby. One of them is transparency, and by that I mean so many businesses in the food industry don't necessarily have what might be considered a good and positive story to tell, because every business is involved in the taking, making, and wasting of resources to some extent. But the transparency about this is where we are, guys. This is where our business is. These are the targets we're setting. These are the metrics we're setting. This is how we're going to go about it. And a great example of this would be some of the work that Tesco and the suppliers have done in food waste reduction over the last number of years. There have been years where food waste hasn't gone down. Oops, that wasn't the plan. Here's the reason why. Now, how do we do better? We've seen it with businesses such as, many Unilever and Nestle, businesses like that, very transparent about what they're doing and where they're going. So that's the first one. Secondly, setting ambitious targets, because it's also possible to be transparent and say, well, we're going to measure ourselves on the following basis against a target from a long time ago, or a baseline of a long time ago. And that's great. It gives businesses a story to tell, but it doesn't really help us make any significant progress against the challenges of sustainability and of climate change in particular. And the third one is the living of sustainability within the business itself. And by that, I mean that, look, service and quality and cost and all the usual metrics will always be the measures of performance and success within business. And sustainability is given an equal footing within business plans, within objective setting and measurements of performance. And then, so those three together, transparency, ambition, and living sustainability through objective setting, they for me characterize leadership.
Okay, I want to touch on something, and the questions come in. You've mentioned a few times in the webinar around this Tesco statement on deforestation last week.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of, as I mentioned, and the listeners picked up on, you referenced this a few times. Sort of, what is it, and why is it so important? Why is it so significant?
It's the significance is that I suppose deforestation, especially Amazonian deforestation and the fires, that iconic image of the Amazon is burning, which we've seen in many media publications. This is the classic, I suppose, NGO kind of call to action. Oh, the Amazon is burning, we need to do something about it. And they have made calls to Tesco and to many other leading businesses about this. And it's part of an ongoing dialogue, it's the usual cycle. The importance of the statement, I think, from Tesco, and they are stating what other businesses are doing, which is that they are seeking to ensure that the foods they supply are as deforestation free as possible. It's an almost impossible task in one sense, but that's their ambition. How can we supply food to you as shoppers in the UK, which is as deforestation free as possible? And that's a big deal, because land use change, driven by the need to create more land, to grow more food, to feed more people, land use change is the single biggest driver of climate change, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So that's the big context. Okay. The second aspect of it is the fact that they were promoting, look, and we're doing all of this as alternative protein sources, which have little or nothing to do with deforestation. So that's its importance.
Okay, thanks. We've just had a question in saying, we covered a lot ourselves, and you've referenced a number of sort of organisations that give information around sort of sustainability. Are there any particular sort of sources of information, organisations that you would recommend some of the listeners definitely go and sort of get in contact with, find out more, be it around particular topics or more general? So it's a bit of an open question, but yeah, can you direct the listeners to anywhere where they could get more information around sustainability and the impact, and I guess potential solutions to help make the companies more sustainable?
Okay, well, around the food industry itself in the UK, two very useful organisations, the British Retail Consortium and their climate change statement and the work that they're looking to do, Food and Drink Federation, their work in decarbonisation and recent report that they have released. An organisation called Three Keel, leading environmental consultancy, have been doing a lot of good work within the UK. And Thesis Group have got some great resources on their website, another leading environmental consultancy. There are others out there, I should hasten to add. On sustainability leadership, it's difficult to get beyond places like Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership at the University of Cambridge, and Forum for the Future if you want some mind-expanding, big picture thinking about what is possible and feasible across various of these wicked challenges. And you can go back to us as well, because we will have more resources coming out on these. Our big issue series of new resources on climate change will be coming out to you in the next month to 6 weeks. We'll probably run another webinar later on this year as well on related topics. So more from IGD as well.
Brilliant, thanks for that really comprehensive answer. And one final question. So, how do sustainability professionals create compelling business cases for their leadership team to sort of actually back sustainability initiatives? What would be sort of your advice there?
It's a long, hard, sweaty process is the first thing, because there's an awful lot of iterations involved typically in getting to a sustainability plan that a leadership team or a senior manager supports. It requires, in my experience, Toby, it requires two fundamental things though. It requires a good understanding of the sustainability subjects and topics that you're trying to tackle within your particular organization, and you've got some measure of current performance and what that might mean in terms of value, whether that be economic value, environmental value, or social value. So you know your stuff. You also need to be able to know your audience you're selling it to and be able to position it in their terms. Because, so if, for instance, our chief executive is an economist, So if I'm going to go and chat to our chief exec about sustainability related issues, I'm going to go with some stats and figures from an economic perspective, which are going to get her attention. And then it's possible. If I turn up with an NGO positioning of an issue, well, I've lost before I even entered the room. So I need to know my stuff and I need to know my audience.
Really helpful and practical advice. Thanks, Alan. So, interest of time, and I think that's sort of really it for today. I'd just like to say to all the listeners, thank you for listening, and thanks for everyone who's submitted questions and obviously for participating in the polls. As Alan mentioned at the beginning, we'll continue to track our hypotheses and see how they develop. And if you'd like sort of more information on sustainability topics, as Alan mentioned, please do visit IGD's websites. So on igd.com/sustainability, you'll find a lot of information around reducing food waste and packaging systems and even healthy and sustainable diets, along with this report that we've been talking about today. And also for the subscribers of IGD's retail analysis out there, again, you can find a lot of information on both our IGD retail analysis website and also our supply chain and Shopper Vista websites. Again, both hyperlinks and email addresses are on the screen. So it really just brings me to say thanks once again for listening. Please take care. And if you would like to get in contact with either Alan or myself, our contact details are on the slide now. So thanks very much and take care. Bye-bye.